Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the Next Level Leap podcast. I'm here with a friend of mine. She's a new friend, and she's become a dear friend. Hey, Jamie, welcome to the podcast.
Hey girl, hey, it's so good to be
Hey.
here.
Oh my gosh, so good to have you here. You are a fitness and lifestyle expert. You're a QVC host, and you happen to be like my neighbor. We go to the same country club. It's so fun.
It's so fun. I love how we met because it's like so something I would do, and it's how I make friends. Do you mind if I
Yeah.
share the story?
Oh my gosh, please.
Okay, so I was at the gingerbread making party at our country club with my two boys, Mason and Asher, who are 4 and 7. And I posted to the social medias as we do. And then
As one does.
afterwards, what's that?
As one does.
As one does. And then afterwards, Miss Laura slid up in my DMs and was like, "Hey, I think we were sitting next to each other. Do you want to
Where?
be best friends?" And I was like, "Obviously." But that's what I do. And I think it's so, let me tell you something. Can I tell you how many people don't do that?
Yeah.
And can I tell you how many people I know, especially over the pandemic, moved out of the city or moved to the suburbs and are not happy with their choice because they're like, it's so hard to make friends. And I'm like, but are you actually, did you try? And they're like, well, no. I'm like, well, I mean, like the friend brigade isn't just going to show up at your door, but like you can make friends if you just talk to people.
Yeah, it's amazing how that works. It was so funny because I posted a photo or a video and then I looked to see at the location because you can see the most popular
I did
post
the
per
same thing.
location. And then I was like, how do I know her? How are we not friends? And then I looked, I was like, oh, she's in from New York. She doesn't live here. And then I was like, wait a second, she lives here. I
I
was
know.
like, ha, like we have kids the same age. We're both like online people. How are we not friends? This needs to get fixed immediately.
100%. And I'm new to the country club and I'm new to the area. So I just want you to know also how doubly I appreciate it and how like welcome it is and how nice it is just to make new friends.
Yeah, yes. As stereotypical as we sound right now, we're going to the country club. Before you know it, I'm going to have you playing tennis.
You know what? I will say this too, because I've gotten some flack on social media for like posting about my country club. But like, here's the deal. Like, when you have kids, you make them play dates, right?
Right.
When you're an adult, you do have to like invest in yourself and in things that are social and make you happy. Because otherwise, again, you're gonna like be in a new place and be like, I don't know, I didn't meet any friends walking out in front of my house. Well, no, you might not. You know what I mean? You gotta go places.
And I love it. We got our families together. Our husbands were in the corner having their bromance. It was awesome. We had a great
100%.
time. Our kids were
I love
tearing
it.
up the country club.
Like literally.
And so you have a huge Instagram account. You have New York City Fit Fam, which is why I was like, oh, she's in from New York. And you have your business. How did this all start? I know we've talked about it, but I'm super excited to share it with the audience.
Yeah. Here's the thing. I was in PR and marketing for almost 20 years. And actually, let me take it one click back because this is always my really fun mic drop moment. Before I was all those fancy things, I was a hopeless drug addict and alcoholic. Such a fun way to start a story. Um, but you know what? It's to me, it's such a part of my story. And I start with this to like set the stage. I had a very like difficult time struggling with my own darkness and demons in my teens and 20s. And as I was starting in the PR world and the corporate world, that still was, there was still whiffs of that, like kind of like floating through my life. As I got sober and found recovery and started to find myself and find joy in life and become a more whole person, boutique fitness became my new nightclub. Like I changed, what I found on the dance floor with like drugs and alcohol and like party friends to, this sweaty kind of fun tribal energy, communal energy that I found with my friends in a fitness space, like a Barry's boot camp or a soul cycle. And it really did save my life. And so I also started, because I was getting well, I started looking around me at the people that I worked with. And I'd worked in corporate for a pretty long time at the point where I got sober. I was in my late 20s, almost 30s, maybe early 30s. And I was like, wow, these people are dropping like flies from burnout, like right and left, right? And like, or they're not dropping like flies. They're just like, everything's okay. And they're miserable.
Yes.
So I started helping people one by one around me to kind of reclaim their health and vitality, reclaim like their actual health goals, like health and wellness, and then also just like mindset shifts. And I make no secret that like a lot of it is what I learned in 12-step recovery, because if you are
Mhm.
somebody who is recovered from drug or alcohol addiction, you're actually so lucky because you get this amazing blueprint for living that's actually abundantly helpful in the rest of your life. And it's like really complex things like have integrity. You're not always the victim. Take accountability. Like,
Mhm.
wake up and make your bed and be a good person. And I was like, really? Wow, this is like fascinating. Like, have an attitude of gratitude. I was like, oh, don't be like this stinky office gossiper and like shit on
Yeah.
everybody's parade. Like, all right.
Yeah.
And so I started kind of like sharing that and paying it forward. And then I met my now husband. He proposed to me on a treadmill at Barry's boot camp. That became a public facing part of our story. And the reason why is because my mom is Joan London. She's a TV journalist. For those of you who are too young to have watched Good Morning America, she was on Good Morning America for almost 20 years. And so the press covered our engagement. And I took that moment and I kind of ran with it. We started an Instagram account together because what had happened is like our engagement was on page 6 and we kind of became that fitness couple in New York City. And I started an Instagram account called NYC Fit Fam. And it was our story as like our health and wellness journey, but also me a little bit sharing my lifestyle tips on how to vibe up a little. That took off. And so over the next like 5 or so years, people followed me through my fit pregnancy journey and my corporate life, but really I wasn't sharing as much about that. I was really sharing about just, fitness, nutrition, conscious parenting, mindfulness, meditation, things like that. And after about 5 years, even though I loved my corporate job and I was very good at it, I was the SVP of a big agency. My side hustle was outpacing my full time hustle. And I
Mhm.
had a choice to make. And also, I'll say this for anybody who's balancing a full time corporate career and a side hustle, what I also realized was I wasn't putting 100% of myself into either. I was representing big brands like McDonald's, LinkedIn, General Motors, W Hotels Worldwide, all these brands, but also working this business on nights and weekends that was like actually earning, like becoming very profitable. And I loved it. It was like my
Yeah.
passion. And eventually I was like, all right, you got to pick a lane. It's great that you
Mhm.
did this, but you have two things going. You got to pick a lane. And so I left corporate. And then the time since, it's been a tremendously exciting ride and trajectory. And it's taken me to have now a TV career, podcasting career. I'm a one-on-one wellness coach and a keynote speaker.
It's so fascinating, that story. And congratulations on just your recovery process and how you've turned it into such a beacon of light. And like that was one of the first things I noticed about you when we had lunch together. I was like, that takes so much courage, even a little chutzpah, for the Jews in the audience. But it takes so much courage to face your demons. And I think everybody has them. They just come in different forms. If somebody isn't, if they hadn't had experience with drug and alcohol, maybe it's anxiety, maybe it's body image, whatever it is. I think we all have shadow sides, right, to our lightness. And when we learn how to flip it into a positive force for good, then we're unstoppable. But that becomes it's everybody's work, right? Like it's not just one person's work who happens to have one type of demon. I think it's everybody's work. And you've done such an incredible job, just like facing it head on and being so inspirational to so many people.
Thank you. Every single person is struggling with something.
Yeah.
And I know that for you listening right now. I see you.
Hmm.
We feel you. I
Yes.
feel you right now sitting on this podcast. You're listening and you're thinking, well, let me think, what's my one thing? We all have our one thing, right?
Oh,
And here's what I say though, like I was really lucky because my one thing really blew up my life. So I had what's called the
yeah.
gift of desperation. A
Right.
lot of people just live with this thing for just lingering, whether it's anxiety or self doubt or the body stuff. I call it your red stapler. So here's the thing I talk about this in my keynotes. Did you ever see the movie Office Space?
Favorite
It's like the
movie. I
greatest
quote it in my
movie.
webinars. Absolutely.
You do? Amazing.
As a
So
consultant, why wouldn't I?
it's so good. And
Yes.
Milton, this God bless
Yeah.
Milton, that character, it's like he just takes it and takes it and takes it. And life is giving it to him and all of his colleagues and everyone's just like pooping on Milton. And he just takes it. And then one day, someone steals that stupid red stapler on his desk. And he's like, you know what? I'm going to burn the whole place down. And it's like, what is your red stapler? It's like, when is enough enough? And can you put your finger on it so you don't have to burn the whole place down, but instead maybe you could like set your soul on fire and do some good stuff with it.
Oh my gosh, love that. Such a good analogy. And I know you mentioned your mom's Joan London. Like, how do you think that has shaped your career? Do you think that has had a pretty heavy influence in what you're doing right now? Or do you think you would have kind of, it ended up in the same spot either way?
100%. My mom shaped so much of what I did because I look up to and respect her so much. She's my absolute best friend on the planet.
Mhm.
Um, What's really interesting is like now that I'm raising kids, I see so much of, I see and understand my mom for who she was and is more. Do you know what I
Yeah.
mean? She worked so hard to show up and be at all of our things while she was also prioritizing work, and rightfully so. She taught us that it's not that work comes first, but I'm a professional and I'm a mother, and both can be true and both are really important. And I want you to understand that like work matters, and you can be anything you want, but you have to like, there's sacrifice. You got to like do the reps, you got to pay the dues, you got to, and she really, really formed how I think about work.
Mm.
She also obviously broke like monumental glass ceilings. She found out she was pregnant with me 2 weeks after she got the job on GMA in 1980. So she
Wow.
literally got the job. Yeah, she got the job, and literally less than a month later, she got the news from her OBGYN. So she literally, imagine getting a new job that you had wanted your whole life, and then you had to go to your boss and be like, by the way, and this is a time when they were not keen on having, that was not like, oh great, like, you'll just be pregnant and wear cool maternity clothes. Like they're like, okay, we'll just hide it,
We won't tell
don't lactate
anybody
on
that
the
you can
air.
actually give birth. Yeah, like we won't tell anyone that you're capable of having children.
Yeah,
Like,
literally that. And Barbara Walters, she's been sharing this a lot recently since Barbara just passed away. The Barbara Walters gave her some incredible advice. She was like, you're gonna have to like be a trailblazer, but also like you gotta go at their pace, right? Like there's only so
yeah.
much that they're ready for. And that was good advice. And so she kind of like she tread lightly, and then eventually ABC let her bring me in with her. So she would like breastfeed. This is before car seats were mandatory. She would breastfeed in the limo, in the back of the limo while she was reading her script, and then like change sides halfway through and then go into the
Wow.
studio. And just thinking back on what she did, I mean, geez, when I was like postpartum, like maternity, like I couldn't even get out of my apartment for 3 months. The fact that she was like just in hosting national TV like a couple of weeks later, but she did it because she had to, and she just persevered. And she's always shown me what's possible.
That's so, so awesome. And so I want to talk to you a little bit about your retreat coming up in April. And I think this is such a nice tie-in to some of what we were just talking about when it comes to addressing your demons and like really looking at, even if you don't have something that you would maybe call a demon, but just things that hold us all back. And most of the people who are listening here are entrepreneurs. I would say probably all of them are. And I just want to have a really honest conversation about trauma, because I think this is something that a lot of people struggle with. It's something that you are partnering with the top trauma expert in the country, if not the world, on a retreat. And I think it's something that that a lot of people struggle to even think about, but is rampant in the entrepreneurial world. Like if you look at statistically, and you probably know this, the amount of entrepreneurs who grew up in a dysfunctional environment or grew up in chaos, because in a lot of ways entrepreneurship is pretty chaotic and you end up kind of addicted to that chaos, and then you end up in entrepreneurship and it's the way in which you know how to survive in the world. But when do you think it's really time to look at this, like in terms of your own background, and to start addressing it?
You just put that so well, because let me say this first. So I have partnered with Dr. Don Wood on this retreat, and I'll tell you how that came to be in a second. But one of the things I was really found interesting is like, well, I guess I'll tell you how it came to be now. Dr. Don came to me and he said, I would love to partner with you on something. I hear you're doing really great work, because a big part of what I do is my coaching program. It's called the Big Ask Method. I essentially teach hyperlocal accountability. So I teach people how to ask for the help that they need with achieving their weight loss and wellness goals. So what that means is like I teach them new healthy habits, but then I teach them how to use somebody in their life, their hyperlocal environment, their husband, their mother, their roommate, to keep that new framework in place and make it sustainable. Because willpower alone, even though we're all type A people on here, if we're all entrepreneurs sitting here on this podcast right now, willpower alone, especially in those tricky spaces, it just doesn't work, right? Like how many people are entrepreneurs that are killing it in the rest of their life, but then I'll get them on a Zoom with me in my big ask coaching program, and I'll say, well, how long have you actually been struggling with like the weight thing and the body image thing? And she's like, oh, since I was 13. And I'm like, Linda, you're 57. It's like, when is it, like, when is enough enough? If nothing changes, nothing changes. So I work with people of all ages, all shapes and sizes, all like lifestyles, on weight loss and wellness. But Dr. Don came to me and he said, I want to partner on a retreat. And I was like, cool. I had heard of him. I knew who he was. And I was like, I want to come down and do if I'm going to partner with you, I need to do your program first. I need to understand what it is before we you know, meld together. I said, but there's one problem. I don't have any trauma. Like, I was like, I don't, I was never abused. I wasn't in like a terrible car accident. He was like, yeah, why don't you just come on down? Like he kind of laughed. And I think what I didn't understand, well, first of all, I started off this podcast by explaining to everybody that I was a drug addict and alcoholic. So clearly I had all sorts of trauma that I was not even aware of. But
Right.
that aside, that doesn't even have to be your truth. There's big T trauma and little t trauma. And that's what Dr. Wood explained to me. So, little t trauma that I have and carry today, here's a good one. My wonderful, amazing mother, who's so inspirational and such a cheerleader of mine, said to me one time when I was a teenager, I've always been a writer and I always wanted to write a book, right? So here I am, a teenager. Now, imagine it from her side. She sees her teenage daughter, who's a total like degenerate, like struggling with drugs and alcohol, right? And I'm like, I'm going to write a book, right? And she's like, she was at that time like an 8-10 best-selling author. And she looked at me and she was like, probably also frustrated, here she is a mom. And she just was like, Jamie, you don't just write a book. Like, you know what I mean? And what she was identifying was like, I was clearly simplifying it. I was living in some sort of like parallel universe where I was like capable of functioning like an adult at that time. Um, but also she was operating off of her know-how. You don't just write a book. Like there's a lot of steps, as you know, Laura, having just launched a book. It's like
Yeah.
incredible. It's like birthing a baby. It's like your book baby. So all of that was true. But what I heard at that age was my mom telling me, you will never be good enough to write a book. You can't write a book. You're not capable of writing a book. You suck. You know what I mean? And I
Mhm.
carried that with me for the next 25 years. And I didn't realize I had internalized that for such a long time until finally this past year, I wrote a book and I was like unpacking this stuff. And I was like, wow, I literally believed that I couldn't do that for 25 years. Now that's little t trauma. That's little, nobody intentionally harmed me, but that is what Dr. Wood would call emotional concussions. It is something that gets stuck in my mind as a part of my brain, as part of my thinking, that literally impacted and impeded me for all of this time. So, my question to people out there is like, whether you have big T trauma, which he absolutely can work on, he's helped victims of the Boston Marathon bombing come, back to real life and all these different things, or whether you're just a high performing professional, entrepreneur, C-suite professional, world-class athlete. He works with people like that to elicit more inspired performance, because what he does is he takes away some of those emotional concussions that have maybe been impeding your thinking and your behavior. And he allows you to think more clearly and more confidently because you sweep away some of that wreckage.
Gosh, that's so fascinating. So, what is it like to go through that type of process where you are identifying maybe even a small t trauma that you didn't even know you had, and then working through it with somebody like Dr. Wood?
So it's a neuroscientific approach. And what's interesting about that, I had no idea what to expect when I went down there. He's in a place called Lake Nona, Florida, which I also have to say the coolest place I've ever been, and that's where the retreat is. It's in Orlando. When I think of Orlando, I just think of like Disney World. So I had no idea that there was this amazing, they call it like the Silicon Valley of like the Southeast, but for health. It's like this very tech forward, super cool, beautiful area that has a lot of like health and wellness startups and co-working spaces and research hospitals, and he's there. But they also have these gorgeous hotels. Our partner hotel is called the Lake Nona Wave, and it's like Instagram threw up on it. It's like the most beautiful backdrop you'd ever want to take pictures at. The room is super tech forward. The toilet was smarter than me. I walked in the bathroom, the toilet started like spraying like sanitizer and heating up the seat. The lid opened and it was like talking to me. I was like, what is even happening? But
It's so good.
that's our hotel partner. So it's already, I was impressed with the area and excited on the potential to do a retreat with them, but I had no idea what to expect when I showed up at his clinic. The first thing that he did for me and that he will do for our retreat participants is he does brain mapping. So they put a thing on your head and you go
Oh,
through like a host of questions and all these different things where they measure the way that your synapses are firing in different parts of your brain and what kind of a learner are you and yada, yada, yada. So he literally mapped my brain, his team mapped my brain. And then you go in and you do essentially like the trauma clearing work with him, which is essentially like talk therapy, but it's not. It's not like, I'm going to tell you about this thing that my dad did when I was 5 and just like lamenting about it. What it is like he has you walk through the experience, and I won't probably describe it exactly right. So I'll leave it a bit vague because I do want people just to come experience it. But
Yeah.
he'll have you walk through the experience and do several different techniques, verbal and physical, to remap the way that your brain processes the
Wow.
information. So I'll give you an example. Like I have like a sense memory of like falling off my horse and dislocating my shoulder. And anytime I talk about like dislocating a thing, like whatever, I couldn't even have this conversation we're having right now. I would like have a visceral reaction.
Mhm.
Tears, like I would start like almost crying, and then I would like cringe and I would get nauseous. Like it was such a horrible, gross
Mm.
memory, and it just did something physically in my body. He walked through that experience, and we did a few different exercises where he literally had me play the experience in my mind, and then we kind of ascribed a number to each time segmentation of the experience, and then we remapped. We talked about the numbers in different order, and all of a sudden, that grip that the mental experience had on my brain, it
Wow.
was gone. Like my brain was just processing the information in a way that it my brain felt more in control of it because we had taken that control back. So it's very, very fascinating. You don't even have to talk about the actual trauma. Like if you're not ready to talk about it publicly, he can do it by without you actually verbalizing it. So I thought that was fascinating as well. So understand that to come and do this work with Dr. Don, he's essentially taking my group. It's a small group, 10 to 15 humans. So everybody gets a really personalized amount of work, and he resets you. It's like pushing the reset button so you can literally walk out of there like your best, clearest, highest performing self. Last thing is that he also remaps your brain on the when you're leaving. He remapped my brain the last day I was there. I had a 47% increase in neuroplasticity, a 51% decrease in rumination. So like ruminating on like negative thoughts. I was like, that is bananas. So it
Yeah.
really is, we don't know so much, about the brain. I mean, I don't claim to be a brain scientist, but it is fascinating how we can restructure and manipulate the way our brain processes information to really free us up for the way that our mind can control us.
Yeah, that's amazing. I love hearing, and I had heard of him before you even mentioned it to me. And I was like, oh my gosh, I've heard of that guy. Like he's been a speaker at masterminds that I've been part of. And he's really like making a name for himself on helping people deal with the different traumas that come with just life. But it sounds like he really works with a lot of entrepreneurs too.
He really does. A big part of his business is working with very high performing people, like
Yeah.
athletes will call them, and they're like, oh man, I'm third in the world. And like, this is it Ironman, not Ironman. Yeah, Ironman. Third in the world at this endurance sport, but I want to be first in the world. Like, can you help me get there? And he's like, yeah. Nike called him. They had just signed an athlete, like a marathoner, and the person wasn't. They're like, this guy physically he's got it, but he's just not performing at his highest output. And it's here. I'm pointing to my brain right now, my head. It's up here. His block is up here. Can you help him? And he worked with the guy, and the guy took like 30 seconds off his splits, which if you're a runner, that is a tremendous amount of time to take off your splits. So, that is really what's so interesting about him. His center is called the Inspired Performance Institute. It's not called like the Trauma Center. It's called like so think about inspired performance. I think that's something that we can all kind of take a shine to. And then in addition to Dr. Don, I have two other people who decided to participate in this weekend, this retreat. And they're two of the most exciting, phenomenal, badass women that I've ever met, had the pleasure of meeting in my life. One of them is Anne Malum. She is the founder of Solid Core, which is my new favorite workout modality. I just started going. There's one in Wilmington, by the way, Delaware. So
I know you keep wanting to invite me, and
gotta
I'm
come.
like, oh my gosh, that looks really hard.
It's so good. But I knew about Solid Core, and I knew about Anne because I also knew about one of the other charities that she started called Back on My Feet, which is it gets people recently incarcerated like into running as like a method to give them life skills and job skills and confidence. So I was familiar with that already and familiar with her. And then we were connected by somebody, a colleague, and she was like, I want to speak to your people. And Anne has $100 million net worth, and she's public about that. And I always say, like, because I just really crush on girl boss entrepreneurs. I think if you have 100 million net worth and we are like around the same age, I would like to know how you did that. I think that's very fascinating.
Totally.
And I would
Totally.
like you to share that with my audience as well, because I think they would probably like to know how you did that. And then the second person is a girl named Nikki Sharp, and she is another badass wellness personality. She's a transformational life coach. She has about 500,000 followers on Instagram. Not that that makes you a whole invalidated person, but it does mean a lot of people like what she says.
Yeah, totally.
Um, and she's amazing. She's also like drop dead gorgeous. And she's one of those people who, when you're like gonna have a call with somebody like that, like she's this like highly influential, gorgeous, like looks like a supermodel. Not that I get intimidated, but like, you're getting on the call and you're like, oh, what's this gonna be like, And we ended up just like getting on this call and goofing off like girlfriends. We were on the call for an hour and 20 minutes. She was like showing me her new shoes out of her closet by the end of the call. Like we were that kind of girlfriends. And I was like,
Oh, so
this
good.
is somebody I want speaking to my people,
Yeah.
because not only is she, you know, very, highly aspirational, let's put it that way. But she's also that girlfriend, that best girlfriend that you didn't know you needed. But then she's also the one who's going to call you on your shit and be like, when are you going to drop that old story? And I think we all need someone like that in our life. So it's all four of us participating in this retreat, this, leading as the practitioners of this retreat. And I'm very excited to have opened up spots and to be offering them to your community specifically.
Oh, so good. All right. So if somebody wants to learn more about this retreat, we'll get into how they can get in touch with you. But if they want to attend this retreat, what's the best place for them to go?
Easy breezy. My site for my coaching is thebigaskmethod.com. So there's a landing page for the retreat, which is thebigaskmethod.com/retreat.
Okay. So good. I think it's so amazing that you are doing this work. Because I think what a lot of fitness and probably even health professionals miss is just the mental side of things. And I love that you are so dedicated to both and committed to both because they're equally important. And one might even argue that the mental health side is even more important so that you can be able to really fully realize the physical benefits of having great mental health.
It's so true, Laura. And I was just talking about this yesterday. I have another podcast that's launching this year with Warner Brothers dedicated to the big ask. I have another podcast called Off the Gram, which has been really fun, covering the wellness space. But my new podcast is really dedicated to the big ask method because I believe so strongly in what I'm doing over there with the accountability piece. I think it's what changes the game. But somebody was asking me, one of our sponsors over there, like, hey, what are the takeaways? Like what really is like what makes your thing different? And I said, that's really easy. Most diet and exercise programs start with the program, and then you have to fit into the framework of their program. And I take like a human centric approach. Like everybody is different. So the first thing I do with people is unpack your why. And we get
Mhm.
to the bottom of your story, because also, quite frankly, and this might be like bringing up a controversial topic, but I take issue with the body positivity movement only because I'm obviously extremely body positive and all bodies are beautiful. But what I take issue with is there is the complete rejection of all conversation of like diet and exercise culture. And I get a lot of pushback on
Yeah.
NYC Fit Fam. People saying like, don't you know that talking about, dieting is passe? And I said, I'm sorry. 62% of America is overweight or obese. I didn't make up that stat. It's according to the CDC. Okay. So I hold space for people who are struggling. But what's so important about this podcast that I'm doing and why I'm doing it the way I'm doing it is that each season we follow one woman and we're telling her story from the beginning.
Oh,
Because
so good.
and when I say the beginning, I mean like she's 10 years old. She's coming down for her first day of fifth grade, and she's really excited to show her mom, her new dress. And her mom says, this is verbatim, oh, please, Jennifer, do you think anyone's going to see anything other than a fat girl?
Oh my God. Oh,
Now, as
that's gonna
horrific
that
as that is,
that stay with you for a long time.
for forever. Now, most
Yeah.
people don't have that experience, thank goodness.
Yeah.
But a lot of people do have experiences. Maybe they were teased for being the pudgy girl in middle school. I have a client, this beautiful client who lives in Arizona. She's in her 60s. And when we got to the bottom of it, she literally was holding on to an old story that when she was teased for being what they said was, you're fat, and she was a child. And she has just believed that about herself. It's been a self-fulfilling prophecy for her entire life.
Right.
And my point in telling these stories is for everyone to give themselves a little bit of grace. When
Yeah.
other people are telling you, just get tough on yourself, just put on your big girl panties and don't eat so much and follow this diet and exercise more. It's like, it is not that easy. And
Yeah.
I am abundantly aware of that. And everybody needs to just take a breath and give themselves a break. So, if anything, I'm the most kind of body positive, forward type of person because I really believe that, like, not only should we celebrate every body, we should celebrate everybody's frustration and disappointment in themselves, like, or allow for it. If you have not been able to get it up until now, rather than just celebrating where you are and being like, it's okay that I'm like not at a healthy BMI, maybe be like, you know what? I can give that version of me a really big hug because it's been really hard.
Yeah.
And I deserve some grace and I deserve to own my story around that. But I also deserve to give myself the power and the credibility that I can take that narrative back and I can change it for the future. And so that's what I'm trying to bring forward.
I love that. I love that. And for me, movement has saved me. And it's so tied to our mental health. And when we think about, how probably I felt or you're felt right before or after pregnancy, that's the time where I've been the heaviest and I didn't feel like me. I didn't feel like I could move well, or I didn't have the mental space that you have when you're in motion and and you're just used to that being part of your world, or when you're eating things that make you feel good. It's all connected, and I love that you're really inviting people into that reinvention process, um, no matter where they're coming from.
So
It's so
true.
powerful.
And
So
nutrition is medicine as well. So just so everybody understands, it's like to call it all blanket diet culture is just such a misnomer. Like,
yeah.
you eat processed food for a week and then you go and you eat nourishing foods and fruits and vegetables and avocados and things that are yummy and nourishing, and you tell me how you feel one week versus the other. Your mind works better, your gut
Mhm.
health is better, so your mood is better. Like, it is also intrinsically tied. So I find it always very, interesting, that people are so against diet culture, but here we are talking about mental health at the forefront. It's like, hello, they're tied together. You treat yourself well. It's like how you do one thing is how you do all things.
Totally, totally. And then once you get into it, it's like fun and exciting. And you're like, oh, I didn't even know about this nutrient or supplement, or I didn't even know that this type of food would create this kind of, response. And you start feeling really in control of your body, and it's very empowering. So I could chat with you forever about all things nutrition, wealth, wellness, health and wellness.
I like it.
End of the day here, and friendship, which I'm so grateful for ours. And if people want to connect with you, in addition to getting to know about the retreat, what's the best way for them to get in touch?
They can head on over to Instagram. I am always available at NYC Fit Fam. My DMs are always open, and it's a great way to get in touch with me. And if you want to ask questions about the retreat, I'm available over there as well.
Awesome. Thank you, Jamie, for being here. Thank you for sharing your perspective. I appreciate you, and I look forward to seeing you soon.
Yeah, thanks for having me.